In February 2022, I hauled 9 books, and I feel like the question that remains is where are they now? Did I unhaul them? Do I still own them? Did I read them? Did I DNF them? I'm going to discuss all of those things, but first I want to give a quick update on how decluttering my shelves is going and creating a self-destruct list and all of that. So last month, in the month of January, I shared that I was going to work on decluttering my bookshelves and moving off of them some of the books that I just feel like I'm really not going to read or I'm less interested in or I'm willing to unhaul if I just don't get to them. And I'm still going to do that, but instead of doing it monthly, I've decided to do it quarterly because I want to give myself some time to reorganize some of the oldest books on my shelf and look at a couple of other things. And I'm just going to push that off slightly so I can focus one whole video on doing that a couple of times a year instead of every month. And I think that's going to work better. So I mentioned that because the last time I did a book haul revisit, I also followed it up by trying to read one of the 3 books that I still owned. I'm not going to do that in this video. This video is just going to be me revisiting February of 2022 and specifically the books that I hauled then. I have my little notebook here and I'm going to use this to help me go through all the books. I'm going to start by talking about the 5 of the 9 books that I unhauled. I read 3 of them and 2 of them I unhauled unread, and I'm going to talk about each of them and the reasons why I read or didn't read them or unhauled them to begin with. The first book is Jerusalem by Alan Moore. That book has been unhauled and it was unhauled basically unread. I had gotten it for, I think, $1 at a library book sale. It might have been even less than that. It was a hardcover edition, and it was a book that I tried a couple of chapters of physically reading, listening to on audiobook, and I basically DNF'd it. I don't know how much you want to consider needs to be read for it to be a DNF, but I did try reading the book, and I just realized I wasn't interested in it. I didn't like the way the story was flowing. I didn't like the story that it was inspired by or that inspired it or something like that, and so I just let it go. The second book I unhauled was The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This has nothing to do with the book itself. It was just more having to do with by the time I got to that book, I had a much better sense of what my reading taste in fantasy was. I bought that book, at this point 4 years ago, and I just knew it wasn't a book that I was going to be interested in reading. It is high fantasy. It has a lot to do with kind of court politics type of thing. So it's not only a genre that I'm just not reading a lot of right now. It's also 2 subgenres within it that I tend to not like, even when I do take the time to read them, which is the high fantasy and the court politics. So I just decided that there's plenty of people who still like that book and are interested in it, and I could get some credit back. So I'm pretty sure I let go of it at a time where I was still near or at a used bookstore where I could get good credit in return and replace it with a book that I was more interested in reading. The next 3 books that I unhauled are all books that I read and actually enjoyed. And in fact, one of them I'm going to have to look because I don't think I did unhaul it. Hang on. Okay, I double checked. I was wrong. I did unhaul it. So that book is Illborn. That is written by Daniel Jackson. I read this book in its entirety and I actually really enjoyed this book. And there's a teeny tiny part of me that actually regrets unhauling it. But again, I sent it back out into the wild. I'm pretty sure I unhauled it before moving to the area I live in now. And so I was going to get a lot of store credit for it where I did unhaul it, which is also an area that has a lot of fantasy readers in it. And it's a book that I've actually recommended on my channel because I did like it. So this is a case where it's just a book that I knew I wasn't going to reread. And it was also a book that, because I don't tend to read a lot of series, I wasn't interested in continuing the series, though it was tempting to do so. That's how much I liked the book. But at the time I unhauled it, I just knew it was a good time to let it go. It was a big, bulky book. It didn't make sense to move it with me. And again, I unhauled it to get something that I would want to read more currently and possibly love and keep. Book number 3 was Water for Elephants, and this is a book that I had had on my shelves for quite a while. I think it was a book that I owned supposedly since 2022. I guess that makes sense because that would be I owned it before I even started my booktube channel, and that sounds right. And I had heard a lot about this book from various sources, including I think because there's a movie on it. I thought I was going to like it and want to read it, and I did think it was okay, but it was definitely not a book that I wanted to keep and hold on to and reread. I think I also picked it up for a quarter, so that's why I owned it and gave it a try. It might have even been something I found in a little free library. I don't remember, but it's not on my shelves anymore. And then the third book is Escape. This is not my usual genre of like nonfiction memoir about someone escaping a cult. I was given to it for free from, I think, a family member who also got it for free or something like that. And so I figured before unhauling it, which I knew I was going to do, I was like, well, they give it to me, let me at least read it. And I did, and it was okay. It was pretty insightful as to what was going on in that cult and with this, poor woman and everything that happened with her. But it was definitely not something that I would hold on to or the type of book that I feel like I could recommend to anyone. So I read it and then moved on from there. So I have 4 books that I still own that are on my bookshelves, and all 4 of these are unread. So I'm going to talk about them with you and what my plans are and how I feel about reading them now. For these 4 books, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I have 2 that are sci-fi, 1 that's literary fiction, and the other one is fantasy. And all of these are books that I hauled in February of 2022. The first book I'm going to talk about is Children of Time. This is a work of science fiction. It is part of a series. It's fairly long. It's a book. I don't remember what initially made me haul this book. I think I was trying to dabble in sci-fi at the time, and I wasn't sure what I did and didn't like in sci-fi and whether or not I'd like this book, but it comes up all the time if you watch any booktube sci-fi channels, so that's probably how I ended up owning it. And then it's just sat on my bookshelf ever since then. I think because my interest in it was starting to wane. But then in the last year, I've started to read more and more science fiction and have really started to get to know my taste in it better and to get a better idea of what I love. And so that started piquing my curiosity in this book more, because as I started looking up specific tropes in science fiction that I like, this book continued to come up. And then I even had a friend who came over with her husband for dinner. Her husband's a huge sci-fi fan, and he said that this was one of his favorite books and highly, highly, highly recommended it to me based on other things that I like. And then that got me super excited about reading this book. And the only reason I don't think I started it last year is because I was really trying to keep the number of series I was in the middle of, like, down to a minimum. So this is one of the series that when I'm ready to start another series, I plan on going into this one. I think the other thing that I hesitated about this book was I was afraid it was going to be too much of a space opera. And while I think to some extent it might be, he assured me that there were enough other tropes in it that I like that are in this book that he thought I would still enjoy it, even if I found some aspects of it soap opera-y. So I'm excited to read this, and hopefully I'll get to it this year. I don't know, because I've got quite a few series that I'm trying to knock out this year, again, before starting more. We'll see if I succeed at that. But this is on my shelf, and my plan is for books like this to put them on the far left-hand side of my shelves so that when I go to pick books for my TBR game, they'll be some of the first books that I look at, because I always look at the left side of the shelf and go to the right, because that's the direction in which I read. But yeah, so that's my plan. So you may see this coming up later this year if things go well. Since I mentioned that I had 2 science fiction on this list, I thought I'd go ahead and talk about the second one, which is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Obviously, I picked this up as the same time as Children of Time, and I think the same exact thing happened to this book. It's very popular. I heard lots of people mention it. I wanted to try sci-fi, and then I wasn't sure. And again, in the last year, I've become more interested in sci-fi again. I've become more familiar with what I like, and I also read my first Becky Chambers, which was To Be Taught If Fortunate. And I was going back and forth between that, Psalm for a Wild build, or just having this one be the first book of hers that I read because I own it. And I was talking to somebody in a bookstore and who was really into science fiction, and they actually recommended that I start with the smaller book. They were like, it's a novella, it's going to feel very similar to this one in some ways, and they were like, and you'll have, sort of taste test Becky Chambers without having to commit to a first book, a longer book, and the first book in a series. But now that I've tried that, I'm ready to commit. So I can't wait to start this. This is also another series that if I decide to start a series this year, this is probably one of the other ones that I would look at starting. In 2022, I can say that the vast majority of what I was reading was fantasy. In fact, I'm remembering that I normally show you the books that I was reading at the time, so let me put that on the screen. I will put up here the books that I read in February 2022. I know based on last month that I wasn't necessarily using the story graph as vigorously as I do now, so it may only be one book to show you, or a ton, or none. Last month's was funny. It was literally just one book. I know I read more during that month, but apparently that was the only one that I logged on the story graph. So back to what I was saying with the fantasy, I read a lot of fantasy in 2022. That was kind of the genre that got me back into reading. And so I was looking at different places trying to get recommendations for fantasy books to read. And one of the things that I discovered was SBFBO, which is the Science Fiction Fantasy Blog Off. Is that what it is? I'll put it on the screen and I'll link it below. But it is sort of a community award that gives that basically finds a winner for this award based on self-published fantasy or science fiction novels. I really followed the one that is dedicated to fantasy and was looking just for some interesting, lesser known published fantasy works. I think it's a great source if you're willing to, give something a try that hasn't been traditionally published or even independently published. It's been self-published, as I said. Anyway, long story short, The Ember Blade is the book that I picked up. This has now been traditionally published. I think I have the traditional, yeah, this is the Orion edition. Is that the publisher of this? I don't feel like that's actually right. Yeah, this edition is published by Orion, but I'm pretty sure that this book was originally self-published. It is a fantasy novel that is a journey adventure story along the lines of Lord of the Rings. It's basically almost like a more modernized retelling of it, if you will. I mean, it's a different storyline. There's different things that are going, but it's definitely intended to have the same feel and be the same sort of traditional fantasy as The Lord of the Rings. So supposedly, if you like The Lord of the Rings, you may very well like this book. Now, I haven't been into fantasy that much of late. This is along the lines of higher fantasy, though I do enjoy books that feel like The Lord of the Rings. So this is probably one of the few high fantasies that I'm still willing to try that I currently own. So this is another book that has aged quite a long time that is probably going to go on my self-destruct list if I don't get to it this year, or will be on my self-destruct list this year. It might be unhauled if I don't get to it, but we'll see. I am interested in this, but not as much as the first two books that I mentioned. The final book that I have is Breasts and Eggs. This is a book that's been on and off TBRs in the past, and for some reason I just haven't picked it up. I don't know if I felt like the timing hasn't been right or what it is, and I always forget that the cover of this book is like, I feel like comes across on camera maybe a little inappropriately, and I don't want to be censored by YouTube, so I'll put up on the screen the other cover of this book. Anyway, this is a novel that I do want to read. I know it's about, I think, a woman and her sister and one of their daughters or something like that. Three women, basically. Definitely more of a feminist type of story, and I don't know much about it other than that, which is maybe why I'm not that interested in it or why I haven't been as excited about picking it up. One of the things that I can say that is making me feel a little more excited about the book right now is that it is put out by Europa Editions, and I've mentioned multiple times on my channel, and I'm not sponsored by Europa Editions, but I do like the books that they pick out. 9 times out of 10, they end up being a 4-star rating for me. I'm still hoping one day to find a 5-star from them, but for me, they're always a good, solid read, and at this point, I'm happy to basically have a guaranteed 4-star read every time I pick up one of their books. So I'm kind of expecting this to be another 4-star read for me. I just have to finally put it on a TBR and actually read it. So out of the 9 books that I hauled in February of 2022, I have read 3 of them so far, and I still own 4 that I need to read, and for the most part, still really want to read. There's really not any of these 4 that I feel like, nope, I should just unhaul and get rid of, except for maybe the Ember Blade, and that's really more of a personal reading taste that I've learned over time that's making me question that one. The other 3, I do have every reason to believe that I would actually truly enjoy. But regardless of that, I'm hoping to give all 4 of them a try before making any type of decision to unhaul them. So that's it. That's all I have to share. That's my 2022 revisit. That's where all these books are. And yeah, it's not that like long a list. I can say that I have looked ahead a little bit and March is an even shorter list, which I'm happy to say. And then things go downhill from there. So stay tuned if you would like to see how my book hauls kept increasing in the year 2022 and what the end result of each of them is and all of that kind of thing. So that's it for today. Let me know if you know what you hauled in February 2022 and how many of those books have you read, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!